Some betrayals don't arrive with screams or shattered glass. They come quietly, in forward text messages on anniversary nights. They arrive in champagne growing warm on marble counters, in emerald dresses no one sees, in pregnancy tests hidden like shameful secrets. Meet Amelia Carter, 28 years old, brilliant mind, broken spirit. 3 years ago, she was a financial analyst fresh from Columbia University, ready to change the world with her sharp insights and fearless ambition. She had fire in her eyes and dreams that wouldn't fit in any penthouse. Now, she's Mrs. Marcus Hale. A ghost in designer clothes. A woman who lives in a $10 million penthouse but can't remember the last time she chose anything, not the furniture, not the art on the walls, not even the dress currently clinging to her rain-soaked skin. Her auburn hair, her intelligent green eyes, her graceful presence, all invisible to the man who promised forever in a Manhattan courthouse 3 years ago. Tonight is their anniversary. Tonight, she carries a secret that weighs no more than a breath but feels like the entire world, 6 weeks pregnant. And tonight, everything changes. The rain fell like accusations against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Each drop, a small betrayal, echoing through the silence that had become Amelia's constant companion. She stood motionless in the center of the living room, her phone clutched in one trembling hand. The screen glowed mockingly, displaying 4 words that had just demolished her carefully constructed hope. Working late. Don't wait up. 4 words. Not even, sorry. Not even, I forgot. Just 4 casual words that confirmed what Amelia had known deep in her bones but refused to admit: she had disappeared from her own marriage long ago. The champagne she'd bought, the expensive kind, the kind Marcus preferred, sat warming on the marble counter. 2 crystal flutes positioned beside it with the kind of desperate optimism that now made her chest physically ache. She'd imagined the scene so clearly, him walking through the door, her surprise on his face, the way he might pull her close and whisper that he'd been working too hard, neglecting what mattered most. Foolish. So incredibly foolish. 3 years. Today marked 3 years since she'd stood in that courthouse and promised forever to Marcus Hale, 12 years her senior, impossibly sophisticated, magnetically successful. 3 years since she'd believed that marriage meant partnership, that love could grow from ambition and shared goals. 3 years of learning, slowly and painfully, that she'd been catastrophically wrong about everything. The penthouse sprawled around her, all designer furniture and carefully curated art, each piece selected by Marcus's decorator. A museum, really. A showroom. Amelia had never chosen anything in this space. She existed here like a ghost haunting rooms that belonged to someone else's vision of success. Even now, dressed in the emerald silk dress she'd bought specifically for tonight, the one that hugged her curves perfectly, the one that cost more than her first car, she felt like an intruder in her own home. Her reflection stared back at her from the darkened windows, superimposed over the glittering Brooklyn skyline. 28 years old, though she felt ancient tonight. Her hair fell in waves past her shoulders, professionally styled that morning in preparation for an evening that would never happen. She'd stopped counting the nights Marcus came home late. Stopped waiting up with questions that only earned dismissive answers or, worse, that patient tone he used when she was being emotional or needy. When had she become so small? The phone buzzed again. Amelia's heart leaped. Maybe he'd remembered, maybe he was calling to apologize, but no. Just a notification from her calendar app: anniversary dinner, 8 p.m., don't forget to tell him about the baby. The baby. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, still flat beneath the silk. 6 weeks, according to Dr. Morrison yesterday. 6 weeks of carrying a life that Marcus didn't know about yet, of imagining his face when she told him, of hoping, God, how she'd hoped, that a baby might bridge the distance that had grown between them like an uncrossable chasm. She'd been saving the news all week, waiting for tonight. Their anniversary. The perfect moment. She'd even wrapped the pregnancy test in tissue paper like a precious gift, tucked it in her coat pocket where it now sat, a secret too fragile to expose to the harsh light of reality. Tonight, you'll witness a woman's disappearance, not through tragedy, but through choice. A woman who learned that sometimes the most dangerous prisons are the ones we build with our own compromises. This is the story of Amelia Carter, and the night one stranger saw what her husband had been blind to for 3 years. If you've ever felt invisible in your own life, if you've ever wondered what happens when love becomes a transaction, stay with me. Because what starts in a rain-soaked restaurant will lead somewhere you never expect. Standing here in this empty penthouse, dressed like someone else, waiting for a man who'd made it abundantly clear she wasn't a priority. Playing house in a marriage that existed only on paper and tax returns. The champagne mocked her. The dress felt like a costume. The pregnancy test in her pocket felt like a weight that might pull her through the floor. Amelia grabbed her coat, long, black wool, probably selected by Marcus's assistant for last Christmas, and left the penthouse without bothering to turn off the lights. Let him come home to illumination. Let him wonder, just for a moment, where she'd gone. Though she knew he wouldn't. He'd pour himself a scotch, check his emails, maybe fall asleep in his home office without even noticing her absence. That was their life now, two people existing in parallel, never actually touching. The elevator descended in weighted silence, her reflection trapped in the polished brass doors. She looked like someone playing dress-up, a girl pretending to be the kind of woman who belonged in penthouses and emerald silk. The doors opened onto the lobby, and Robert the doorman's eyes flickered with concern. He'd been working this building for 15 years, he'd watched dozens of marriages play out in the space between elevator and exit. He knew the signs. "Mrs. Hale, can I call you a car?" "No, thank you, Robert." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow, distant. "I'd like to walk." His eyebrows lifted slightly. It was pouring rain, and she was in 4-inch heels, but he simply nodded with the discretion that came with his profession. "Have a good evening, ma'am." The rain hit her immediately, cold, cleansing, brutal. Amelia walked without direction, her heels clicking against wet pavement, the city lights blurring through the downpour. She should have grabbed an umbrella, should have changed shoes, should have done 1,000 things differently, starting 3 years ago when she'd convinced herself that Marcus Hale's attention meant something more than temporary interest in an acquisition he wanted to make. Because that's what she'd been to him, wasn't it? An acquisition. Another beautiful thing to display in his carefully constructed life. They'd met at a corporate gala when Amelia was fresh out of Columbia with a degree in financial analysis and dreams of making a real difference. Marcus had been magnetic that night, successful, confident, impossibly sophisticated in his Tom Ford suit. He'd listened when she talked about market trends and economic policy. He'd seemed genuinely impressed by her insights, had asked her opinion on deals he was considering, had made her feel like the smartest person in the room. For 6 months, he'd courted her with the same intense focus he applied to business deals. Flowers delivered to her tiny apartment. Dinners at restaurants she'd only read about. Tickets to shows, trips to vineyards, weekends in his beach house in the Hamptons. She'd mistaken that focus for love. The wedding had been small, pragmatic. Marcus didn't believe in extravagant ceremonies, and Amelia had no family to invite anyway. Her parents had died in a car accident during her sophomore year of college, leaving her alone in the world except for a few distant cousins she'd lost touch with. Marcus had seemed like salvation. An anchor. Someone stable and established who could give her the family she'd lost. Instead, he'd given her isolation wrapped in luxury. Amelia found herself in front of a restaurant she didn't recognize. Warm light spilled from its windows onto the rain-slick street, and through the glass, she could see white tablecloths and flickering candles, couples leaning close in conversation, the kind of intimate dinner she'd imagined having tonight. The sign proclaimed in elegant script, "Bella Notte." Beautiful night. The irony wasn't lost on her. She pushed through the door before she could talk herself out of it, before the rational part of her brain could list all the reasons this was a terrible idea. The hostess looked up with a professional smile that faltered when she took in Amelia's rain-soaked appearance, designer dress clinging to her body, mascara probably running, hair hanging in damp strands. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "No, Amelia's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, forced strength into it. "Just me. Table for one, if you have it." Something softened in the hostess's expression. Women understood these moments, recognized them in each other. "Of course. Right this way." She was led to a small table near the back, tucked into a corner that felt both private and achingly lonely. Amelia ordered wine before remembering the baby, and changed it to sparkling water with a tight smile that felt like it might crack her face. The hostess didn't comment on the substitution, for which Amelia was pathetically grateful. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and classical music, something Italian, passionate and melancholy. Amelia sat with her back straight, trying to look like someone who chose to dine alone on their anniversary. Someone confident and independent rather than abandoned. Her coat dripped onto the floor. Her hair hung in damp strands. The pregnancy test in her pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. She'd never felt more pathetic in her entire life. "Excuse me." The voice was deep, touched with an accent she couldn't quite place, Italian, maybe, smoothed by years in America. Amelia looked up and found herself staring at a man who made the air shift around him. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from Renaissance marble. Sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed with evening stubble, and eyes so dark they appeared black in the candlelight. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been made on his body, the kind of tailoring that cost more than Amelia's monthly salary back when she had a salary, back when she was someone who worked instead of someone who waited. But it wasn't his looks that struck her. It was his presence, a quiet intensity that suggested power held carefully in check, like a predator who'd learned to move among prey without startling them. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his voice measured and precise, every word chosen deliberately. "But you dropped this outside." He held out his hand. In his palm lay the pregnancy test, wrapped in tissue paper that had come partially undone in the rain, the 2 pink lines clearly visible. Amelia's heart stopped. Heat flooded her face, humiliation so intense it felt physical, as she snatched the test from his hand, shoving it into her purse with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she managed, not meeting his eyes, willing him to leave, to return to whatever table he'd come from with a story about the crazy pregnant woman dining alone on what was obviously a special night. But he didn't leave. He remained standing there, his dark eyes studying her with unsettling focus, seeing things she didn't want seen. "Forgive me," he said quietly, and there was something in his voice, not pity, but understanding. "But you look like someone who has recently received very bad news." Amelia let out a sound caught somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who has learned to read people." He paused, then gestured to the empty chair across from her. "May I?" Every instinct told her to say no. She didn't know this man. He'd seen her pregnancy test, witnessed her humiliation. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to refuse politely and maintain what little dignity she had left. "Please," she heard herself say. He sat with fluid grace, folding his tall frame into the chair as if he belonged there, as if this had been planned all along. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. He was older than Marcus, maybe mid-40s, but he wore it differently. Where Marcus's age made him feel distant and paternal, this man's maturity suggested depth, experience, secrets kept and stories untold. "Dante Moretti," he said, offering his hand across the table. "Amelia." She shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his grip, the calluses that suggested he was more than just another corporate executive in an expensive suit. "Amelia Carter." She'd hesitated before using her maiden name, the name she'd kept for work while becoming Mrs. Hale everywhere else. But tonight, she didn't want to be Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale was the woman whose husband forgot their anniversary. Mrs. Hale was invisible. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Amelia," Dante said, and the way he said her name, slowly, deliberately, like he was tasting it, made something flutter in her chest. "Though I wish the circumstances were happier." His eyes never left her face, and there was something in his gaze that made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Maybe ever. "You're dining alone on a night like this," he continued, his voice gentle but unflinching. "That suggests either remarkable independence or profound loneliness. Given what I saw in your eyes when you took back that test, I suspect the latter." Amelia should have been offended by Dante Moretti's directness, by the way he dissected her life with surgical precision. Instead, she found it oddly refreshing. Like coming up for air after drowning for 3 years. "You're very perceptive for a stranger," she said, her voice steadier now. "I've found that sometimes strangers are easier to talk to than the people who are supposed to know us best." He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease in a way that made the bustling restaurant seem to fade into background noise. "They have no expectations, no history to cloud their judgment. No reasons to pretend they don't see what's right in front of them." He paused, and his dark eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Would you like to tell me why you're here alone, Amelia Carter? Or should we maintain the comfortable fiction that you're simply a woman who prefers her own company?" She studied him for a long moment, this man who'd appeared from nowhere and seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed composure like it was made of glass. There was something undeniably dangerous about him. She could sense it in the way other diners glanced his way with a mixture of respect and wariness, in the way the staff had straightened when he walked through the restaurant, in the coiled power beneath his refined exterior. This was not a man accustomed to being told no. And yet there was also kindness in his face, a gentleness in how he'd returned her pregnancy test without judgment or prying questions, without making her feel small. The contradiction fascinated her. Frightened her. Drew her in like gravity. "It's my anniversary," she said finally, the words spilling out before she could stop them. 3 years today. I've been planning this evening for weeks. Special dinner, champagne, the whole romantic gesture that women are supposed to want. And he. Her voice broke. She took a breath, forced herself to continue, because somehow it felt important to say it out loud, to make it real. He sent a text saying he was working late. 4 words. Working late. Don't wait up. Not even an apology. Not even an acknowledgement that today was supposed to matter. Dante's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes, something that looked like recognition, like he'd heard this story before in different words from different women. "And the test?" His voice remained gentle. "He doesn't know yet. I was going to tell him tonight." Amelia laughed, and it sounded bitter even to her own ears. "I actually thought, God, how stupid, I actually thought maybe it would change things. That we could be a family. That he might finally see me as more than just another fixture in his perfectly decorated life, another thing he owns that requires minimal maintenance. But you don't believe that anymore." It wasn't a question. Dante said it with such certainty, like he could read the truth written across her heart. Amelia shook her head slowly, feeling something break loose inside her chest, something that had been cracking for months, maybe years, finally giving way. "No," she whispered. "I don't think I believe in much of anything anymore." The waiter appeared then, a young man with an eager smile who greeted Dante in rapid Italian. Dante responded in the same language, his accent suddenly richer, more authentic, and the waiter's face lit up like he'd been given a gift. After he left, Dante turned his attention back to Amelia, and she had the unsettling sensation of being the sole focus of something vast and powerful. "When I was younger," he said, his voice taking on a thoughtful quality, "I made the mistake of believing that love could be earned through sacrifice. That if I gave enough, became enough, transformed myself into what someone else needed, the people I cared about would eventually value what I offered. He paused, his fingers drumming once against the white tablecloth, the only sign of tension in his otherwise calm demeanor. I learned painfully that love which must be earned is not love at all. It's a transaction. And you, Amelia Carter, deserve more than to be another line item in someone's ledger. You don't know anything about my marriage, she said, but there was no heat in it, no real conviction. I know you're sitting alone in a restaurant on your anniversary, pregnant and trying not to cry while your husband works late. Dante's voice remained gentle, but there was steel beneath it, the kind of strength that didn't need to shout. I know you used your maiden name when you introduced yourself, like you're trying to remember who you were before you became Mrs. Hale. I know the dress you're wearing is expensive but not your style, the cut is too severe, too corporate. Someone else chose it for you, just like someone else decorated your home and planned your life and made you feel like a ghost in your own existence. Amelia stared at him, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. How could you possibly? Because I've spent my life reading people, understanding what they hide and what they reveal without meaning to. His gaze never wavered. And you, Bella, are a woman who has been disappearing for a very long time. Bella. The Italian word for beautiful. He'd called her beautiful, but not in the empty way men usually did, not as flattery or seduction. As observation. As truth. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She had been disappearing. Piece by piece, choice by choice, she'd allowed Marcus to erase her until she barely recognized herself anymore. The ambitious analyst who'd graduated top of her class, who'd had opinions about Federal Reserve policy and big dreams about financial reform, that woman had become a silent ornament in a penthouse, waiting for scraps of attention from a man who'd stopped seeing her years ago. When had it happened? When had she given up her power? I don't know how to stop, she whispered, and the admission felt like ripping something vital from her chest. You already have. Dante leaned forward, and his intensity focused entirely on her felt like standing in front of a fire, warming, dangerous, impossible to ignore. You walked out tonight. You came here instead of waiting in that empty apartment like a good wife. You're still fighting, Amelia, even if you don't realize it yet. Even if you're terrified of what that fight might cost you. The waiter returned with their food, pasta that Amelia hadn't ordered but that smelled incredible. Somehow Dante had known what she needed, just as he seemed to know everything else about her. They ate in silence for a while, and Amelia found herself relaxing despite everything. Despite the surreal nature of this encounter, despite the fact that she was sitting across from a complete stranger discussing the ruins of her marriage. There was something profoundly comfortable about Dante's presence, as if she'd known him far longer than these few strange minutes. He didn't press her with questions or offer empty platitudes about things getting better. He simply existed across from her, solid and real and somehow safe, while the rain continued to fall outside and the restaurant hummed with other people's normal, uncomplicated evenings. Tell me about yourself, she said finally, needing to shift focus away from her own misery. What do you do, Dante Moretti? Besides read strangers' souls in Italian restaurants? A slight smile touched his lips, the first real expression of warmth she'd seen from him. I solve problems for people who have nowhere else to turn. That's deliberately vague. Yes, it is. His smile widened fractionally. Let's say I've built a career out of understanding human nature and the systems that govern our lives. I help people navigate difficult situations, remove obstacles, create new possibilities when the old ones have failed them. You make it sound almost mystical. There's nothing mystical about it. He took a sip of wine, his dark eyes never leaving her face. I simply see things clearly while others are blinded by emotion or convention or the stories they tell themselves to make their lives bearable. He set down his glass with deliberate precision. For instance, I can see that you're trapped in a marriage that's slowly killing who you are. I can see that you're pregnant and terrified because bringing a child into that situation feels impossible. And I can see that you're already considering your options, even if you haven't admitted it to yourself yet. Amelia set down her fork, her hands shaking. What options? Her voice came out strangled. I have a child to think about now. I can't. Can't what? Dante's voice remained soft, but there was challenge in it. Leave? Rebuild? Choose yourself instead of a man who's already chosen to abandon you? Those are all choices, Amelia. Difficult ones, certainly. Painful ones. But choices nonetheless. You don't understand. Marcus, she struggled to find words that didn't sound like the excuses they were. He has connections, resources. If I tried to leave, if I fought him on anything, he'd destroy me. My career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. Would he? Dante tilted his head slightly, and something flickered across his face, something dark and knowing. Or is that what you've been conditioned to believe? That you're powerless? That you need him? That stepping away would mean losing everything? He leaned forward again, and there was something almost fierce in his expression now, something that made her pulse quicken. I have news for you, Bella. You've already lost everything that matters. The question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. Whether you're willing to save what's left, yourself and your child, before he erases you completely. Tears burned in Amelia's eyes, hot and humiliating. I'm not brave. I'm just tired. Exhaustion and bravery are not mutually exclusive. Dante reached into his jacket and pulled out a card, sliding it across the table with a fluid motion. It was simple, heavy card stock with just a phone number embossed in black ink. No name, no company, no other information. If you decide you want to disappear, he said, his voice dropping to something almost intimate, call this number. I can help you vanish so completely that even someone with Marcus Hale's resources won't find you. You and your child could start fresh, build a life that's entirely yours. No more waiting, no more hoping, no more making yourself small to fit into someone else's definition of who you should be. Amelia picked up the card with trembling fingers, the weight of it somehow significant, like it represented more than just embossed paper. Why would you do that? She asked, looking up into those dark, unreadable eyes. You don't even know me. Let's say I have reasons of my own for helping women escape difficult situations. Something dark crossed Dante's face, pain, maybe, or old anger, gone before Amelia could identify it. And perhaps I see in you something worth saving. Someone who deserves a chance to remember who they were before they learned to make themselves small. Before they accepted crumbs and called it love. This is insane, Amelia said, but she didn't put the card down. Her fingers closed around it like it was a lifeline. I can't just disappear. That's not how real life works. Isn't it? Dante's smile was sad now, and for the first time, she glimpsed something vulnerable beneath his polished exterior. People disappear every day, Amelia. They leave marriages, cities, entire lives behind when the weight becomes too much to carry. The only difference is whether they do it with planning and protection, or whether they simply run blindly and hope for the best. The restaurant had begun to empty around them, other diners finishing their meals and heading back into the rainy night. Couples holding hands. Friends laughing together. People living lives that didn't feel like slow suffocation. Amelia glanced at her phone and saw it was past 11. No new messages from Marcus. He'd probably already forgotten she existed. Was probably asleep in his office, or still at work, or with someone else, a thought that should hurt but somehow didn't. The betrayal would have been if he'd loved her once and stopped. But he'd never really seen her at all, had he? She'd been a convenient acquisition, attractive enough for corporate events, smart enough not to embarrass him, pliable enough not to challenge him. I should go, she said, though she made no move to stand. The thought of returning to that empty penthouse felt unbearable. You should, Dante agreed, but his tone suggested he understood her reluctance. But before you do, I want you to ask yourself one question." He paused, making sure she was listening, that she would hear him. "When you imagine the future, 10 years from now, 20, can you honestly see yourself still waiting in that penthouse for a man who will never prioritize you? Can you imagine raising your child in that environment, teaching them by example that love means accepting scraps and calling it enough? That their worth is determined by someone else's attention?" Amelia's throat tightened painfully. She thought about her own childhood, her parents' warm, chaotic house full of laughter and fierce affection. They'd fought sometimes, sure, but they'd also danced in the kitchen at midnight and left love notes for each other in unexpected places and made every single day feel like an adventure worth having. That was what she'd wanted to give her own children someday. That sense of being cherished and seen and absolutely essential to someone's happiness. That knowledge that love was abundant, not rationed. That you didn't have to earn your place in someone's heart. Marcus would never give her that. She'd known it for a long time, probably since the first year of their marriage, when his attention had shifted from her to the next business deal, the next acquisition, the next thing he could control and perfect. She'd just been too afraid to admit it. Too afraid of being alone again, of losing the security she'd convinced herself she needed. "I can't think about this right now," she said, standing abruptly. The room tilted slightly, from emotion or hunger or the weight of everything collapsing, and Dante was there immediately, his hand steadying her elbow. His touch was warm through her coat, solid, real. "Easy," he murmured, and there was such gentleness in his voice that it made her want to cry. "When did you last eat?" "I don't." She tried to remember. "Breakfast, maybe?" Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You need to take care of yourself, Bella. Especially now." His eyes dropped briefly to her stomach, then back to her face. "Promise me you'll eat something when you get home. Something substantial, not just whatever you can grab." "I don't think I have." She stopped. The truth was, she didn't know what was in their kitchen. The housekeeper kept it stocked, but Amelia rarely looked. Marcus ate out most nights, and she'd fallen into the habit of just not bothering. Another small way she'd disappeared. "Come," Dante said, his hand still supporting her elbow. "I'll make sure you get home safely." "You don't have to." "I know." His dark eyes held hers. "But I'm going to anyway." Outside, the rain had softened to a mist that hung in the air like uncertainty. Dante's car, a sleek black Mercedes that probably cost more than most people's houses, waited at the curb, and a driver materialized from somewhere to open the door. Amelia should have declined. Should have called a car service. Should have maintained some boundary between herself and this mysterious man who'd somehow seen through her in the space of an hour. But she was so tired of shoulds. She slid into the leather interior, and Dante settled beside her with that same fluid grace. The driver didn't ask for an address, Dante simply said something in Italian, and they pulled smoothly into traffic. "How did you know where I live?" Amelia asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "I didn't." Dante's smile was slight. "But the address will be on your ID when you show it to the doorman, and I'm very good at reading upside down." It should have been creepy. Instead, it felt oddly reassuring, this evidence of his attention to detail, his ability to solve problems before they arose. They drove in silence through the rain-washed streets, and Amelia found herself memorizing details, the way Dante's hands rested loosely on his knees, the scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated, the way his profile looked against the passing lights of the city. She would probably never see him again after tonight. This was just a strange interlude, a moment out of time. Tomorrow she would wake up in the penthouse, and Marcus would be there or he wouldn't, and life would continue in its miserable, predictable pattern. Unless she made a different choice. The car pulled up in front of her building, and Robert rushed to open the door with an umbrella despite the light mist. "Mrs. Hale, I hope you had a good evening." "I did, Robert. Thank you." And surprisingly, impossibly, it was true. Despite everything, despite the humiliation and heartbreak and uncertainty, these last few hours had been real. She'd felt real. She'd felt seen. Dante walked her to the elevator, his presence commanding enough that Robert didn't question it. "You have my number," he said as she stepped into the elevator. "Use it if you need to. Or don't. The choice is entirely yours, Bella. But know that you have options. You always have options, even when you've been conditioned to believe you don't." The doors began to close, and Amelia found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "Dante, why do you care? Really?" His expression shifted, and for a moment, she saw past the polished exterior to something raw and wounded beneath. "Because once, a long time ago, someone I loved very much needed help like this, and there was no one to offer it." His voice was quiet, heavy with old grief. "She stayed too long in a situation that was destroying her, and by the time I understood what was happening, it was too late." The elevator doors closed on his face, but his words echoed in the small space as Amelia rose through the building toward the penthouse that had never felt like home. Every life-changing decision happens in a single moment. But that moment is built from 1,000 small betrayals, 100 ignored truths, and one undeniable fact: you cannot love someone more than you love yourself and expect to survive. This is where Amelia Carter finally understands what it means to choose herself. The penthouse was dark when Amelia stepped inside. Of course it was. Marcus hadn't come home. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, her hand still on the light switch, looking at the space with new eyes. Everything Dante had said about her life, about her disappearance, crystallized into painful clarity. This wasn't a home. It was a museum to someone else's success. The champagne still sat on the counter, the flutes still positioned with pathetic optimism. Her anniversary cake, ordered from Marcus's favorite bakery, the one he'd mentioned once in passing, sat in its white box, never opened. She'd spent 3 years memorizing his preferences while he'd never bothered to learn hers. Amelia walked to the window and looked out at the Brooklyn skyline, her hand pressed against the cold glass. Somewhere out there, Dante Moretti was driving back to whatever life he led, probably already forgetting about the broken woman he'd found in the rain. But she wouldn't forget him. Couldn't. Because he'd given her something she hadn't even realized she'd lost: permission to want more. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Home late. Emergency acquisition meeting. Go ahead and eat without me." Amelia stared at the message, and something inside her finally, irrevocably broke. Not with anger or tears or dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet, definitive snap, like a rope that had been fraying for years finally giving way. She walked to the bedroom, stripped off the emerald dress that Marcus had never seen, and changed into jeans and a sweater, her clothes, from before the marriage, things she'd kept in the back of the closet like memories of who she used to be. Then she started packing. Not everything. Just essentials. Clothes, documents, her laptop, the few personal items that actually belonged to her. Everything fit into 2 suitcases, a stark measure of how little of her own life she'd maintained in this space. She left the jewelry Marcus had given her in its velvet boxes. Left the designer dresses and expensive shoes. Left everything that belonged to Mrs. Marcus Hale. Because that woman was dead. Had been dead for a long time. And Amelia Carter was finally ready to stop pretending she existed. At 2 a.m., Marcus finally came home. Amelia was sitting in the living room, her packed suitcases by the door, the card with Dante's number clutched in her hand. She'd been sitting there for hours, gathering courage, rehearsing words, preparing herself for the hardest conversation of her life. Marcus walked in still on his phone, barely glancing her direction as he headed for his home office. Then he stopped, noticing the suitcases. "What's going on?" He looked at her like she was a puzzle he needed to solve quickly so he could get back to more important things. "Are you going somewhere? We need to talk." Can it wait until morning? I'm exhausted, and I have an early call with Tokyo. No, Marcus. It can't wait. Something in her voice made him finally look at her, really look, maybe for the first time in months. Amelia, what's this about? She stood, her legs trembling but her voice steady. I'm pregnant. Silence filled the penthouse, heavy, suffocating. Marcus's face went through a rapid series of expressions, shock, calculation, something that might have been frustration. Not joy. Not even a flicker of warmth. Pregnant, he repeated flatly. How far along? 6 weeks. Are you sure it's? He stopped himself, but the damage was done. The question hung in the air between them like poison. Amelia laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Are you seriously asking me that? When was the last time you even touched me, Marcus? When was the last time you came home before midnight? When was the last time you looked at me like I was anything more than furniture? That's not fair. Fair? Her voice rose. You forgot our anniversary. I stood in this apartment for hours, dressed up, waiting to tell you we're having a baby, and you sent me a forward text. Working late. Don't wait up. That's all 3 years of marriage is worth to you. 4 words. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing, back when she'd convinced herself she loved him. Look, I know I've been busy. Busy. That's your answer? You're busy? Amelia felt something powerful uncoiling inside her, anger, yes, but more than that. Truth. Years of suppressed truth finally breaking free. I have been dying in this marriage, Marcus. Slowly, quietly dying. I've erased myself piece by piece trying to fit into your perfect life, and you never even noticed. You never asked what I wanted, what I needed, who I was before I became your wife. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. Maybe for the first time since we met. She picked up her suitcases. I'm leaving. Now she had his full attention. Marcus stepped forward, his expression shifting to concern, or maybe just alarm at losing control of something he considered his. Leaving? Don't be ridiculous. You're upset, hormonal. Don't you dare blame this on hormones. Her voice was ice. I'm leaving because I finally understand that staying will kill who I am. And I can't do that to myself. I definitely can't do that to our child. Our child. Marcus's jaw tightened. You can't just leave with my child, Amelia. I have rights. I'll fight you on this. And there it was, the threat she'd been conditioned to fear. The reminder of his power, his connections, his ability to destroy her if she didn't comply. But standing there with her suitcases and Dante's card in her pocket, Amelia realized something crucial: she'd already survived the worst thing. She'd survived becoming invisible. Everything else was just logistics. Go ahead and fight me, she said calmly. Take me to court. Use your connections. Do whatever you think you need to do. But I'm still leaving, Marcus. Because staying here, raising a child in this cold, empty place while you prioritize everything except family, that would be the real tragedy. She headed for the door. Where will you even go? Marcus called after her, and she heard the first hint of genuine concern in his voice, though whether for her or for his reputation, she couldn't tell. You don't have family. You gave up your career when we got married. You have nothing without me. Amelia turned back, and she was surprised to find she was smiling. You're right. I don't have family. I did give up my career. And maybe I don't have much right now. But I have something more important than any of that. What? Myself. I have myself back, Marcus. And it turns out that's enough. She walked out of the penthouse, into the elevator, down to the lobby where Robert waited with that same careful discretion. He didn't ask questions, just helped her load the suitcases into a taxi and told her, quietly, "Good luck, Mrs. Hale." "It's just Amelia now," she said. Amelia Carter. And for the first time in 3 years, that name felt true. 3 months later, Amelia stood in the small apartment she'd rented in Queens, nothing like the penthouse, but entirely hers. She'd used the card Dante had given her, and within 48 hours, he'd helped her disappear more thoroughly than she'd thought possible. New bank accounts Marcus couldn't access. Legal representation that actually cared about her welfare. Connections to support networks for women leaving difficult marriages. And something else, a job offer at Dante's company, doing the financial analysis work she'd loved before marriage had turned her into an ornament. She hadn't seen him since that rainy night, though they'd spoken on the phone several times. He'd been professional, helpful, and had never once asked for anything in return. Had never made her feel like she owed him. He'd simply given her the tools to save herself, then stepped back and let her use them. Now, at 14 weeks pregnant with a small bump finally showing, Amelia looked around her modest apartment and felt something she hadn't experienced in years: peace. Her phone rang. Dante's name flashed on the screen. "Hello? Bella." His voice was warm through the line. "How are you feeling?" "Better." "Good, actually. Really good." She laughed, surprised by how true it was. "I started the new job last week. Everyone's been wonderful. I heard. Your supervisor says you're already making an impression." There was a pause. "I'm glad you called me that night. I'm glad I could help." "Dante," Amelia took a breath. "Would you like to meet for coffee? I've been meaning to thank you properly, and phone calls don't seem adequate." Another pause, longer this time. "I'd like that," he said finally. "I'd like that very much." They made plans to meet the following day, and after hanging up, Amelia stood at her window looking out at the Queens skyline, less glamorous than Brooklyn, but somehow more beautiful in its honesty. She thought about the woman she'd been 3 months ago, drowning in luxury, invisible in her own life. She thought about Marcus, who'd fought her for exactly 3 weeks before his lawyers realized she had better representation and wasn't going to crumble under pressure. He'd sent one email since then. "I suppose I should congratulate you. You've managed to make yourself a problem I don't have time to solve. The settlement terms are acceptable. My lawyer will be in touch." No mention of the baby. No questions about her well-being. Nothing that suggested she'd ever mattered beyond her utility. And yet, miraculously, it didn't hurt anymore. Because Amelia had learned something crucial in that rainy restaurant, sitting across from a stranger who'd seen her more clearly in an hour than her husband had in 3 years. Love should never require you to disappear. Not romantic love, not familial love, not any kind of love worth having. Real love, the kind that actually sustains and strengthens and matters, sees you fully and celebrates what it finds. It doesn't erase you. It doesn't ask you to be smaller, quieter, less. It says, you, exactly as you are enough. The next day, Amelia met Dante at a small cafe in Manhattan. He was already there when she arrived, looking distinguished in a charcoal suit, and he stood when he saw her, a gesture of respect that Marcus had stopped performing years ago. "You look well," Dante said, and his smile was genuine. "Happiness suits you, Bella. I feel like myself again." Amelia settled into the chair across from him. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed that until I got it back." They talked for hours, about her new job, her apartment, the baby, a girl she'd found out yesterday, her plans for the future. And slowly, carefully, Dante began to share pieces of his own story. The woman he'd loved who hadn't escaped in time. His sister, he finally admitted. Brilliant and beautiful and trapped in a marriage that had ended in tragedy. He'd built his entire second career around making sure other women had options she'd never been given. "I can't save everyone," he said quietly. But when I can help, when someone's brave enough to reach out, it matters. It has to matter, or her loss means nothing. Amelia reached across the table and took his hand. It matters, she said firmly. You saved my life, Dante. Maybe not literally, but in every way that counts. You gave me permission to see clearly, to choose myself, to believe I deserved more. That's everything. He squeezed her hand gently, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You saved yourself, Bella. I just held up a mirror. Maybe both things were true. Maybe salvation was always a collaboration between the person who offers help and the person brave enough to accept it. They finished their coffee, made plans to meet again, as friends, as colleagues, as two people who'd found each other at exactly the right moment. And as Amelia walked back to her apartment, her hand resting on the small bump beneath her coat, she realized something profound. She wasn't alone anymore. Not because she had Dante, or because she'd eventually have her daughter, but because she had herself back. And herself, strong, clear-sighted, determined Amelia Carter, was more than enough to build a life on. Amelia stood in her new office, nothing extravagant, but hers, earned through talent and hard work rather than marriage. On her desk was a photo of her daughter, Elena, who had her mother's auburn hair and a smile that could light up the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dante. Dinner tonight? Elena's welcome. I've been told I make an excellent uncle figure. She smiled, typing back. We'd love that. 7 p.m. Life wasn't perfect. She still had hard days, moments of doubt, battles with Marcus over custody and finances. But she was fighting them as herself, fully present, fully alive, refusing to disappear for anyone's convenience. And when Elena asked her someday about her father, about why mommy and daddy don't live together, Amelia would tell her the truth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is leave. Sometimes staying is the real betrayal, of yourself, of your potential, of your child's chance to see what strength actually looks like. Love should make you more yourself, not less. And anyone who asks you to be smaller so they can feel bigger doesn't deserve the gift of your presence. The life lesson. Music softens to something reflective. Here's what Amelia's story teaches us. You cannot pour from an empty cup. For 3 years, Amelia tried to love someone while erasing herself, and all it did was create a ghost where a woman should have been. Love that requires you to disappear is not love, it's transaction. When someone only values what you can do for them rather than who you are, they've confused you with a service provider. You always have choices, even when you've been conditioned to believe you don't. Amelia thought she was trapped, by finances, by Marcus's power, by her own fear. But the truth was, the only real prison was the story she'd been telling herself. Sometimes strangers see us more clearly than the people who claim to know us best. Dante recognized Amelia's truth in an hour because he wasn't invested in keeping her small. He had no reason to lie to her, no need to maintain her silence. The bravest thing you can do is choose yourself, especially when everyone expects you to keep sacrificing. Walking away from luxury, security, and the life she'd worked to build took more courage than staying ever would have. Your worth is not determined by someone else's ability to see it. Marcus's blindness to Amelia's value didn't diminish her. It only revealed his limitations. And finally, it's never too late to stop disappearing and start living again.